Hey YouTube, it's Reef Girl here. So everything's in the house now. The 20-gallon display with 15-gallon sump, and it's running. It's been running for almost 24 hours, and everything's working the way it should, as far as I know. We made a couple of modifications in a couple of things since the testing that we did in the garage. First thing was the skimmer bar. We had the skimmer bar installed. You can see the bulkhead on the left-hand side, and it was installed going horizontally across the tank. It ran fine, but it was super noisy, and we think it's because the water was being suctioned into the slots on top of the skimmer bar, so it wasn't actually skimming so much as it was draining. And that water, we think, was pulling air with it, so that air was traveling down the pipe into the filter sock and made a pretty strong gurgling noise. It was very, very loud. And nothing we did fixed that until we lowered the water level so that the skimmer bar actually was acting as a skimmer bar right at the surface, and then it was absolutely silent. The problem with that was that the water level was just too low. I didn't like the look of it. It was a good 1.5 inches below the bottom of the black trim, and I really didn't want to deal with that because of the way it looked. There would be marks. I would always be not liking it. So, looking for a couple other solutions, we tried this one, which is the bulkhead rotated very slightly and using a sort of a strainer on the end. You can kind of see the strainer there, and that strainer, the very tip of it, is just under the surface of the water. It still does make noise, and that's still a problem we're going to have to try and solve. But it's much, much less than before, and it allows us to put the water level up where it needs to be. That was quite a surprise, the fine-tuning that we needed for the pump, pushing the water out into the tank, to balance that with the overflow, pulling the water out down into the sump. First chamber where the skimmer is, and the diversion over into the refugium. You can see the T off to the right with the red valve on it. So that was a lot of tweaking and fiddling around, but it's run now for 24 hours with really not much change in the water level. Well, no change actually, and I'm satisfied with how it looks. So I think we're going to go with this unless something else comes along. We have a couple of other ideas of things to do to try and get the actual action of a skimmer bar without it being so far below the surface of the water. We have to work with this tank as is because it was a drilled tank when we got it, and we don't have any real options to make modifications to it. The tank has 2 power heads in it, and I've got those set up to try to figure out what the flow pattern is going to be. I'm waiting for a Jabo WP10 to come in the mail, and once that's here, I will install it on the left-hand side opposite the large rock pile and do some figuring out of what the flow pattern will end up. Part of the issue with the return into the tank is that if we cut it back too much, there was really no flow coming out from that return nozzle, and I use that flow as part of my flow plan, so didn't really want it to be a trickle. I wanted it to be somewhat significant, and this allows that. This particular design allows for that. So it can be a component of my overall flow plan. On the left-hand side, we have the multi-switch power bar and the snake's nest of cords. Each switch that has a light on it is individually powered. There are a total of 7 outlets, one of which is always on, and that one's at the top. And that's where I have the light plugged in, because then no matter what I'm doing in the tank, whatever I need to shut off, I will always have light to see what I'm doing. There's a kill switch at the bottom, which will shut off the other 6 switches if necessary, and leave the top one on, and that's the way I wanted to arrange it. In the sump, we have the glare. Let me see if I can fix that. There we go. We have the left chamber is the skimmer chamber, and the bubble level in the skimmer right now is right where it should be, I think. Hopefully in the next couple of days it'll start pulling out some gunk out of the water. The center chamber, I have the pond matrix in a clear acrylic container on the left-hand wall. It's fastened there with suction cups, and that came from the dollar store. That has holes all around the front on the curved section and also holes at the bottom. So the pond matrix in there has full flow through it. We can actually kind of track the flow by watching the bubbles that are produced from the skimmer flowing down through the pond matrix, and then it hits the bottom and goes across and then goes up the other side to flow over into the bubble trap, the 3 pieces of glass. At the back, underneath the media rack, I have another small basket of pond matrix, and that's for supplementary biological filtration. I threw a piece of Chaeto algae in there from my other tank because I just wanted to see what it would do, whether it would survive, and there's probably a bunch of fish poo and other detritus in there, and I'm hoping that it also has a bunch of bacteria and things like that on it. So maybe it'll actually help cycle the tank. If I see that it's starting to get slimy and looks like it's not going to survive, I'll pull it out of there because I really don't want to add too much decomposing matter to the tank right now. The third chamber is the pump, and I have the heater in there as well. The heater is just lying on its side, pretty much held up by the cord until we figure out a proper stand to put underneath it where I can actually see the screen. I don't have space in there to put it vertically, so it has to be laying on its side on a diagonal excuse me, in order to operate underneath, fully submerged in the water. So the Aquascape, I think it turned out pretty well. It's not what I originally designed, but that happens. So I will be quite happy to work with it as it is. I have lots of little caves and grottos and overhangs, and looking at it from the sides, you can also see lots of places where critters can hide, shrimp and such like, when I ultimately get those in there, and lots of places in the light that I can mount various types of coral that I'm hoping to keep. Speaking of the light, I went with an AI Prime, Aqua Illumination Prime, and it's mounted kind of offset in the tank because there were too many shadows being thrown on the right hand side when I first installed it right in the middle. It's up approximately 12 or 14, well maybe 12 inches from the water's surface, which means it's 14 inches or so to the nearest rock surface, and something like 22 inches to the sand bed. Right now I have it set so that the white lights are on a maximum of 45%, and the UV is a maximum of 25% through the cycle. I ramp it up for 4.5 hours at either end of a 12-hour day. So sunrise at 7, sunset at 7, and ramping up to that and then down from that. The other levels in the tank, the cool blue, the violet, the green, and the deep red, are all at whatever preset levels are available. I haven't messed with those yet. Once I see how things go with actual inhabitants in here, I may proceed and make adjustments to those depending on what I want to look at, what they need to grow, and that sort of thing. The refugium light is a large UV. It has 2 lenses that are UV, 2 that are blue, and 2 that are white, and they're all LED. It's quite bright for this area. I imagine we'll have algae issues in the other 2 chambers, but we'll deal with that when we get to it. I'm not planning to leave it on for huge long periods of time, probably a maximum of about 3 hours a day, maybe 4, depending on what sort of a timing schedule I can create. The final thing to point out is that the entire system is in a tote. This is an under the bed tote. I hope this is bright enough to see. This is one that normally would have wheels on the bottom, so we've removed the wheels and siliconed shut any holes that there were for handles or hinges or whatever, and for the wheels. And the entire thing, we figure, holds approximately 15 gallons of water. The biggest risk here, now that we know and understand the way the sump works, and we know that the sump cannot overflow because the water available to it is a maximum of maybe 2 gallons. We've marked the water level there when we shut everything off and it all drains, and we know it can't overflow. The upper tank, however, could overflow if the downflow, if the overflow on the left gets plugged or restricted in any way. So that's what we have to watch for, because if the return just keeps pumping water into it, it could overflow to the tune of however much water is in that return chamber, a couple of gallons, and really we're not 100% confident, this being the very first time we've ever done anything like this. We are thinking that if we have this tote at the bottom, it would contain the damage somewhat. We realize that there might be splashing, or who knows what else could happen, but the very worst might be we have a puddle of water on the floor instead of gallons of water gushing over and going everywhere. So getting back to the rat's nest of cords, and speaking of water overflowing, those are all going to be tidied up and fastened at a level that's above the power bar with drip loops everywhere, so that if we ever do have a problem with any kind of an overflow, we will not be running water directly into our power supply. So that's where we are today. I've put a bit of shrimp in the tank and some fish food, some flakes, and swished it around a bit so that it didn't go directly into the overflow. And we're going to see over the next couple of days how things go. I also decided to add some special blend bacterial culture that I use in all of our freshwater tanks when we do major cleanup or water change. And it works really well to maintain some sort of bacteria. And that's where I'm hoping it will help start the rocks having bacteria by putting that stuff in. I will probably put it in on alternate days for the next week or so, depending on how things go and what sort of things I see happening in the tank. So that's where we are now, and I'm thinking it's going to be maybe minimum 3 weeks before I can actually add anything to it. When I do, it'll probably be the first thing to go over there will probably be the Duncan coral on the right hand side of my 29-gallon cube, followed by the bubble coral and perhaps the candy cane, anything that's loose and isn't currently stuck to a rock that I have to work with, because that's going to be another adventure, trying to get my Superman Montipora onto a smaller piece of rock that I can then put in the other aquarium in the space I have for them. It's going to be interesting. I have to do a bunch of reading and see whether there's any experience out there with that. It may come down to using a hammer and chisel and trying to get a decently small piece of rock with the Monty on it that I can then move over. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, more than happy to hear it, because every day in this hobby is definitely a journey. We learned a whole lot putting together this 20-gallon system, and that's something that will continue. So thanks, appreciate you watching, hope you liked it. Bye for now.